Several years ago, I shared a video that was titled, "To Those Who Don't Fit In," and I was really surprised by the response. Initially, I didn't expect more than just a handful of people to see it. I wasn't expecting that it would become one of the most popular videos on the channel with hundreds of thousands of views. And reading through the comments, there were so many people who really resonated with the message and who also shared from their own personal experience. And what it showed was just how common it is to feel this way. See, the tendency is to think that no one understands you. The tendency is to feel isolated and alienated from those around you. But what if you're not alone? What if this feeling is much more common than you realize? For much of my own life, I felt like I didn't fit in. No matter where I went, I often felt awkward and out of place. But the thing is, I've only ever lived my life through my own eyes, through my own thoughts, through my own subjective point of perception. And so it never occurred to me that maybe other people felt the way I felt. The thing is, and no matter how out of place I felt, I never told anyone. I would keep it to myself. In fact, if anything, I would try not to let on that I was feeling that way. And who's to say that there weren't other people doing exactly the same thing? What if there were other people who I encountered on a regular basis who, just like me, felt out of place, but just didn't say anything about it? So how do you know that you're the only one that feels that way? What if everyone feels that way? At least some of the time. And I know that there are people who seem to really fit in well, who are well liked because they wear the right clothes, or listen to the right music, or have the right opinions, or whatever it happens to be. But who's to say that they aren't doing all of that just to try and fit in, just to gain the approval of others, just to escape the discomfort of feeling out of place? What if most people feel this way? What if most people feel like they don't really fit in, but no one ever talks about it? And supposing that even the people who seem to fit in so well, who seem to do everything right, what if they're just pretending? What if it's just a performance? Maybe some people just make more of an effort to fit in. Maybe they just try harder. And maybe they do it because they're deeply afraid of being ridiculed or rejected. What if the majority of people have simply learned how to adjust their behavior, their appearance, their opinions and interests and so on, in order to be more acceptable to others? And maybe some people are just better at adapting than others. But supposing that even the people who seem to fit in so effortlessly, what if it actually does take a great deal of effort? And what if sometimes they feel like a fraud? But they're afraid to be authentic because they're afraid that others might reject them. And so they keep up appearances, they keep up the performance in order not to be rejected. And what if some people have gotten so skilled at fitting in, so skilled at becoming the person that others expect them to be, that they don't even know how to be themselves? Maybe they've been putting on a performance for so long that they don't even know who they are anymore. Or maybe some people's identity is so wrapped up in other people's expectations or conditioned by society from such a young age that they never really had the opportunity to form their own opinions, to pursue their own interests, and so on. And maybe they've never really had the opportunity to discover who they really are. And what I'm getting at is, if you're someone who feels that they have difficulty fitting in, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you haven't lost touch with yourself the way so many other people have, because the reality is that everyone is unique in their own way, and we should embrace what makes us unique. I mean, if everyone was exactly the same, how boring would that be? Can you imagine? Your uniqueness is what makes you interesting. And that can actually be an advantage when it comes to socializing or making friends or dating or whatever the situation. Your uniqueness sets you apart from everyone else, but in a good way, because people like novelty. Novelty is what makes life interesting. So embrace your uniqueness, appreciate that you're different, be true to who you are, be authentic. And if you do that, it will actually make you more likable. People in general really appreciate authenticity. And one of the reasons they appreciate it is because it encourages them to also be authentic. And the truth is, most people hate having to put on a pretense. So when they meet someone who they can feel comfortable being themselves around, they really appreciate it. When you're with someone who doesn't care what other people think, it's a relief. If you spend most of your time trying to measure up to other people's standards and expectations, if you're always putting in a great deal of effort to fit in, and then you meet someone who doesn't care about any of all that, all of a sudden you can drop the act. You can just be yourself. So if you can be the person that people feel comfortable being themselves around, they're going to appreciate that. They're going to want to be around you. But first, you have to be comfortable with yourself. And that means not caring what other people think. There's so much pressure to conform, and most people give into that pressure simply because they don't want to be judged or rejected. But conforming means compromising who you are in order to become someone you're not. And everyone feels that pressure. I felt that pressure throughout my life, but especially when I was really young, when I was in a stage of life where you're trying to figure out who you are and you've got everyone telling you who you should be. And for whatever reason, I didn't cave to that pressure. In fact, I rebelled against it. The more that society tried to press me into a mold, the more I resisted. And as a result of that, I did experience a great deal of judgment and rejection. And it never feels good to be rejected. So I can understand why so many people are so willing to conform in order not to feel rejected. I can understand why so many people put in such an effort to fit in. And even though I refused to make that effort, even though I rejected this whole premise of putting on a pretense, I still had the same basic human need to belong. And so there were many times in my life when I would feel alienated or lonely, or at the very least, I would feel awkward in certain social settings, feeling out of place or finding it challenging to really connect with people. And I'm not saying that this was always the case. I've also met many people who I felt very comfortable around, who I immediately connected with, sometimes very deeply. But I've also encountered many social groups where, in order to really be accepted, you did have to conform to a certain standard. In other words, there really wasn't much room for authenticity. In these social circles, there's a lot of pretentiousness simply because you have to pretend in order to fit in. And as I said, this means compromising who you really are. It means compromising your uniqueness, your willingness to think for yourself and to form your own opinions. It means holding yourself back in so many ways rather than expressing yourself naturally and authentically. Now, oftentimes, in order to be accepted into a social group, you have to abandon yourself entirely and become someone else. And when you do that, not only do you lose touch with yourself, you also lose touch with those around you. In that kind of setting, everything is superficial, everything is a performance, there's no real depth. Even though you're engaging with other people, you're not really connecting because everyone is putting on an act. I've noticed how so many people, in their need to belong, are willing to compromise themselves in so many ways. I've noticed how so many people simply go along with whatever is popular at the time, which includes not just clothing styles and music, but also beliefs and opinions. I've noticed how so many people seem not to have their own beliefs and opinions, but to simply regurgitate the beliefs and opinions of others, even when those beliefs and opinions are absurd. That's how powerful this need for acceptance is. Some people are so desperate to be accepted that they're willing to adopt the most ridiculous beliefs and opinions. But you do this at the cost of your own authenticity. But if you can accept yourself and be true to who you are, there are people who are drawn to that. There are people who really respect and appreciate that. There's so many pretentious people in the world that it's refreshing to meet someone who's actually authentic, someone who isn't putting on an act or trying to impress others, someone who doesn't care what others think, someone who has embraced their uniqueness. So don't hide your uniqueness in order to try and fit in. Don't compromise who you are in order to gain the approval of others. Embrace whatever it is that makes you different. And at the same time, it's also important to recognize that there are certain commonalities that we all share. And if you can recognize these commonalities, it becomes much easier to connect with others despite whatever differences you may have. For instance, everyone experiences suffering. Everyone experiences sorrow and sadness, grief, anger, anxiety, frustration, rejection, loneliness, and so on. Everyone has their struggles. Everyone wants to be happy and healthy. Everyone wants to feel loved. Everyone wants to feel safe and secure. And when you understand this, you can look beyond the superficial differences and into the heart of others. You recognize that we're all human beings, that we're all living in this world together. And when you're talking to people, regardless of what they're talking about, you can notice what's beneath their words, their hopes, their joys, their fears, their frustrations. And you can connect at a much deeper level. Rather than connecting solely on superficial or external things, we can go deeper than all of that to the heart of what it means to be human and to connect with one another by means of our shared humanity. Regardless of whether we fit in with some specific social group, we're all part of a much bigger group called humanity. And to belong to that group, you just have to be human. And that doesn't mean that everyone's going to accept you because so many people fail to recognize our shared humanity. And that's unfortunate for them, but it doesn't have to be your misfortune. It's enough for you to recognize this even when others don't. Because when you recognize it, you're no longer an outsider. You're a part of something bigger. You're a part of humanity. And when you embrace that, you begin to engage with others from that place of understanding, which is much deeper and much more meaningful than anything superficial. If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.